The thing about being the kind of man people can count on is that eventually it stops feeling like a compliment. I was standing at my front door on a Tuesday evening in October with a dishcloth over my shoulder and the very specific expression of a man who has opened his door expecting a delivery and instead found a woman he had met exactly twice, standing on his porch with two large suitcases and a duffel bag, and an expression that was equal parts determined and something she was doing a good job of not letting show. Her name was Claire Navarro. She was my ex-girlfriend's best friend. She had been at the going-away party when Dana left for Seattle 18 months ago, and she had been at the dinner the previous Christmas where I had sat across from Dana and pretended we were the kind of exes who were fine, which we were, mostly, except for the part where I was still working out what I was on the other side of that relationship. Claire looked at me with the directness of someone who had decided, somewhere between her old apartment and my porch, that she was going to commit to this. "Dana said you'd let me stay," she said. "Was she wrong?" I looked at the suitcases. I looked at her. I looked at the suitcases again. "She didn't mention this to me," I said. "I know." A pause. Precise. "That's probably on her." I stepped back from the door. "My name is Marcus Webb." I was 36, a high school history teacher, and in the summers, a contractor who flipped older houses into things worth living in, which meant I spent 10 months a year trying to get 17-year-olds interested in dead people and 2 months reminding myself that the work I did with my hands was the part that cleared my head. I lived in a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood that had been almost gentrified for a decade and showed no sign of finishing, which I liked. The house had good bones and the kind of imperfect history that made it honest. I had been on my own in it for the 18 months since Dana left, not unhappily. Not happily either. In the particular equilibrium of a man who has organized a life well enough that he does not feel the absence of what is missing from it until something disturbs the organization. I want to be honest about who I was in those 18 months, because it matters to what came later. I was not broken. I was not bitter. I had processed the end of things with Dana the way I processed most things, methodically, privately, with a certain discipline about not making it bigger than it needed to be. I had kept the house. I had kept the job. I had kept the Saturday morning ritual of the hardware store, the Sunday routine of the farmer's market 3 blocks over where I bought bread from the same baker I had been buying bread from for 4 years, and who had never once asked me about Dana, for which I was genuinely grateful. What I had not kept was the habit of expecting anything. Specifically, not pessimism, I did not expect bad things, just a kind of suspended animation of expectation, in which I was functional and present and, on most days, genuinely fine, but in which I had quietly stopped orienting toward anything in particular. Like a compass that is working correctly but has no north to point at. Dana used to say I was the most reliable person she had ever been with, and that this was both her favorite thing about me and the thing that made her feel, after a while, like she was leaning on a wall rather than standing next to a person. I had thought about that sometimes. I thought she was not wrong, exactly, and also not entirely right, and that the difference between those two things was harder to explain than it was to feel. Claire Navarro was, it turned out, a disturbance. Dana had texted me that morning. I want to be accurate about the sequence. She texted at 8:14 a.m., when I was in my second period class explaining the Missouri Compromise to students who were only partially there, and I did not see the message until lunch. It said, "Hey, heads up, Claire might reach out. She's going through some stuff and needs a soft landing. You're the first person I thought of." And then, 2 minutes later, "I hope that's okay. You're good at this. You're good at this. Not you're a good person, or you're generous, or you're someone I trust. You're good at this." Like being a soft landing was a skill set, something that belonged on a list alongside carpentry and the causes of the First World War. I had stared at the message for a moment, and then I had put my phone in my pocket and gone back to the Missouri Compromise. I did not text back. Not because I was angry. I wasn't exactly, but because I was familiar enough with the shape of what she had said to know it was not a question. It was a notification. So when Claire appeared on my porch that evening, the honest answer to was she wrong was, she was not entirely wrong about what I would do, and I was not entirely sure how I felt about that. "Come in," I said. "I'll show you the guest room." Here is what I knew about Claire Navarro before she moved into my house. I knew she was Dana's closest friend since college. The one Dana called when she needed someone to be honest with her, rather than kind to her. I knew she worked as a structural engineer, which I had found interesting both times I'd met her, given my secondary profession, and which had led to a 20-minute conversation at the Christmas dinner about load distribution and original framing that Dana had eventually interrupted by suggesting we were both the same specific type of nerd. I knew she was funny in the way some people are funny, not trying, not performing, just occasionally saying the thing that cut the room in exactly the right place. I knew that at the Christmas dinner she had been with someone, a tall, quiet man named Ren, who had sat at the other end of the table and said very little, and smiled at her in a way that I had noticed and immediately not thought about again. She was not with him now. That much was clear from the suitcases. The guest room was at the end of the hall. It had a window that looked over the backyard, a closet that ran deep along the south wall, and a quilt my grandmother had made that I kept on the bed because it was too good to fold away and too much for my room. I showed her the bathroom she'd share with the hallway linen closet, the kitchen layout where I kept the coffee. The French press is in the cabinet above the mugs, I said. The grinder's next to it. I grind the night before, so if there's already coffee in the press, it's fine to use. She looked at me with an expression I did not immediately identify. What? I said. Nothing. She set her duffel on the bed. Just, Dana said you'd tell me about the coffee within the first 10 minutes. She was right. I looked at her. She looked back, not smiling exactly. Somewhere just behind a smile. How long are we talking? I said. A month, she said. Maybe 6 weeks. I have a lead on an apartment, but it won't be available until December. I can find a hotel if... You don't need a hotel. I said it before I finished deciding to say it. 1 month is fine. She nodded once. The nod of someone who takes a yes at face value rather than examining it for conditions. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said. You haven't seen what I make for dinner. The edge of her mouth moved. Barely, but it moved. The first week was the architecture of 2 careful people sharing a space. She left early and came home late, the schedule of someone with a demanding job and also, I suspected, someone who was working hard not to be a burden by being invisible. She made coffee for 2 when she made it, without asking, which I noticed. She left the kitchen as she found it. She had headphones she wore in the evenings, low enough that I could see her tapping her finger on the kitchen table to something while she read. I learned her rhythms the way you learn a house, by moving through it without forcing it, paying attention to where the light fell, where the weight settled, what was sound and what needed tending. By the end of the first week, I knew she needed 30 quiet minutes when she got home before she was ready to talk. I knew she ran in the morning, 6 o'clock, and came back with the particular looseness of someone who has moved through something they were carrying. I knew she ate standing up when she wasn't thinking about it, leaning against the counter with a bowl, which was a thing I did too and which I did not mention. What I did not know was why she was here. The apartment I understood, a lease ended, the new place wasn't ready, a friend with a spare room, that was logistical. But the suitcases had been large, and she had not mentioned Ren, not once, and the quality of not mentioning something has a texture to it that is different from the thing simply not coming up. On Friday evening she was at the kitchen table with a set of structural drawings spread out, and I was making dinner, and we had the first real conversation of the week, the first one that wasn't transactional, that wasn't about the house or the schedule or whether I needed the bathroom before 7. What's the project? I said. She looked up. Pedestrian bridge, downtown. The original design has a load issue on the east abutment. I'm trying to figure out if we can fix it without pulling the whole foundation approach. Can you? She looked back at the drawings. Probably. It's fixable. It's just a question of whether the fix costs more than starting the section over. Sometimes the original design is worth saving, I said. Sometimes you strip it to the frame and build back. She looked up again. Something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. How do you decide? You look at what's actually there, I said. Not what you wish was there. What's there? She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at her drawings. The east abutment is worth saving, she said quietly. Not quite to me. Maybe to herself. I turned back to the stove. The second week she started running later, which meant she was back when I was still making coffee, and we developed a morning routine neither of us named. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone. I stood at the counter with the French press. We talked about nothing in the efficient, comfortable way of people who have run out of the need to perform and are just in the same room together. On Wednesday of the second week, she said, without looking up from her phone, "Did Dana tell you why I needed somewhere to go?" "No," I said. "But you let me stay anyway." "You had suitcases," I said. It seemed like a bad time to make it complicated. She set her phone down and looked at me with the full attention she gave things that she had decided to actually look at. It was, I had come to understand, a different quality of looking than most people managed. Like someone who had trained herself to see what was actually there, not what she wished was there. "His name was Ren," she said. "We were together 4 years. I found out in September that he'd been not faithful for most of that time, not catastrophically, just consistently and quietly." A pause. He was very good at quiet. I did not say anything. This was a case where saying nothing was the right architecture. "I'm not devastated," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm angry. There's a difference. Being devastated means you lost something you believed in. Being angry means you lost something you built on a foundation that was never what it looked like. Not because she lost him, because she built on something that was never sound." "The east abutment," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Yeah, there it was. Not a declaration. Not a pivot point you could point to. Just a woman at my kitchen table on a Wednesday morning telling me the actual truth about the actual thing, because we had been in the same space long enough that the performance had become unnecessary, and she was someone who stopped performing the moment it became optional. I refilled her coffee without asking. She accepted it without acknowledging it. We sat in the morning for another 10 minutes, not talking about anything important, which is different from talking about nothing. I drove to school thinking about what she had said, not the content, the way she had said it, the precision of the distinction between devastated and angry. The way she had not asked for a response or a reassurance or for me to tell her it would be fine. She had just stated the accurate thing and let it be accurate. I had been with Dana for 3 years. Dana was warm and social and generous in the way that some people are generous, abundantly, loudly, with real feeling behind it. I had loved her genuinely. The end of us had not been a failure. It had been the quiet conclusion of 2 people who were good together in many ways, but not in the one way that mattered most, which was the way of 2 people who made each other more themselves rather than more comfortable. Dana was good at comfort. I needed to feel like I was adding up to something. I had not met many people who made me feel like I was adding up to something. I was sitting with the fact that Claire Navarro might be one of them, which was a complicated thing to sit with at a red light on a Wednesday morning in October. The 3rd week, things shifted in the way that things shift when you have been not quite saying something long enough that the not saying becomes its own kind of weight. She helped me on Saturday. I had a section of porch railing on the side of the house that had been on my list since August. Old balusters, some cracked, the top rail warped in 2 places. She appeared at 10 o'clock in work clothes she had clearly thought about, which meant she had work clothes, which meant she worked with her hands sometimes in addition to the drawings. "You don't have to," I said. "I know." She picked up a pry bar and looked at the warped section of railing. "Where do you want to start?" We worked for 3 hours. She was good at it, not performing competence, actually competent, the specific kind that comes from understanding how things are supposed to work at a level below the surface. She asked questions that were good questions. She made decisions when I handed them to her without handing them back for confirmation. At one point I was holding a post steady while she drove a screw, and she was close enough that I could see the particular concentration she had when she was doing something she cared about doing right. At noon we sat on the porch steps and ate sandwiches I had made, and she said, "You do this because it clears your head." It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "Me too," she said. "The field work. When I have to go out to the site, something turns off. The part that keeps running the numbers." "The part that keeps running the numbers," I said. "That's it exactly." She looked at me sideways. "Dana said you were easy to talk to." I thought she was being generous. She usually is. But she wasn't, Claire said. Being generous. About that. I did not say anything, which was again the right thing. She looked out at the yard for a moment, the big oak at the back, the beds I kept meaning to tend, the light doing what October light does in the afternoon, gold and going. I have 2 weeks left, she said. The apartment is ready December 1st. I know, I said, quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to miss the French press. I looked at her, the corner of her mouth. The French press, I said. And the porch, she said. And the quilt. A pause, smaller. And you. I set down my sandwich. She was looking at the yard, like someone who had said the true thing and was giving me time to decide what to do with it. Claire, I said, you don't have to. The apartment, I said. How locked in is December 1st? She turned to look at me. Something in her expression that was not quite surprise and not quite not surprise. The expression of someone who had made a calculation and was now watching the result come in. The lease starts December 1st, she said. It doesn't mean I have to be in it December 1st. I looked at her, like a man who had spent 18 months being a soft landing for people who needed one, and had just understood, for the first time, what it might feel like to land somewhere himself. Stay through December, I said. I'll make it worth the French press. She looked at me for a long moment. The yard, the oak, the going gold light. Okay, she said, simply, the way she accepted things she had already decided she wanted before she let herself want them. She stayed through December. She stayed through January too, though by then nobody was counting anymore, and the apartment on Belrose Street had become the place where she kept overflow boxes and a standing lamp she hadn't found the right wall for. The French press became ours in the practical sense. The quilt stayed on the guest room bed for 2 more weeks before she stopped going back to it. In February, a Sunday, the kind of February Sunday that can't decide if it wants to be winter or something else, I was in the kitchen making breakfast and she came downstairs in one of my flannels, which had started happening in November, and which I had not mentioned, and which she had not explained, and she sat down at the kitchen table with the structural drawings she had been working on for the better part of a week. The bridge downtown, the east abutment. How's it looking? I said. She looked at the drawings. Then she looked at me. Then she said, it's going to hold. I put a plate in front of her. She looked at it, and then up at me, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone who is deciding whether to say the last true thing or wait for a better moment. I had learned, very little patience for waiting for better moments. She had learned, I think, that better moments are mostly just the current moment with more courage in it. Marcus, she said. Yeah, I wasn't here because Dana sent me. She said it evenly, the way she said structural truths. I mean, she told me to come, but I already knew where you lived. I'd already thought about it. A pause. That's probably strange to say. It's not strange, I said. I saw you fix the downspout on the north corner of the house once. Last winter. It was early and you probably thought no one was watching. You were careful about it. You kept testing it, even after it was clearly fine. She looked at her coffee. I thought about a person who is that careful about a downspout. I sat down across from her. And then Dana mentioned you, as a soft landing. She looked up. I was angry, about Ren. I needed somewhere to go. But I came here specifically, and I want you to know that. The February light came through the kitchen window. The drawings were spread on the table between us. The east abutment holding. I know, I said. She looked at me. I saw you notice the downspout that morning, I said, from the kitchen window. You had your coffee and you stood there watching me for a long time, and then you went inside, and I thought about it. For a while. She was very still for a moment, like someone receiving information that rearranges the geometry of something they thought they already understood. How long, she said. Long enough, I said, that when Dana's text came through, I didn't need to think about it. She looked at me across the kitchen table on a February Sunday with the structural drawings between us and the light doing what it did on good mornings in that house, which was to come through the east window without apology, and she made the expression I had been learning for 4 months. The one that was not quite a smile and not quite not a smile. The one that was her, specifically, deciding to let something be what it was. The downspout, she said. The downspout, I said. She never signed the lease on Belrose Street. The standing lamp found a wall. In April, she brought her structural drawings home and spread them on the dining room table instead of the kitchen, which was bigger and had better light, and which she had been avoiding using as her workspace out of a consideration for territory that had by then become genuinely unnecessary. I moved the history papers I graded there to the kitchen table, which was smaller but fine, and we passed each other in the hallway between rooms the way people do in a house that fits them. In June, she took me to the bridge. The east abutment repair was finished. We stood on the pedestrian walkway in the early evening, and she pointed to the seam where the old foundation met the new reinforcement and explained what you had to do to make two different eras of concrete talk to each other, which required a level of patience and specificity that I found, listening to her, more interesting than I could easily explain. She was watching me listen. I knew this. I did not mention it. "It's going to hold," she said again. The same words, a different weight. "I know," I said. The same words. I meant them both ways, and she knew I meant them both ways, and neither of us had to say so. That was the thing about her, the accurate thing. We did not have to say so. Have you ever let someone in who arrived at your door without a warning and figured out too late that you'd been waiting for exactly that knock? And did you almost miss it by being too sensible about it? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one hit close, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.